TGC Requiem back with Death Shadow Jun. This is match 2 of our league. Looks like we're going to be on the draw again. This is a decent hand. We don't know what our opponent is on. This could be really bad against combo, but I don't know. I guess we could buy a little time with the Thoughtseize, but I generally like these sort of hands. In general, I would err towards keeping these just because Modern is more of a creature-based format. So we're going to keep. Bauble. So it looks like our opponent is probably a Death Shadow player. Sometimes Abzan plays a couple Baubles, but looking like a Shadow player in some manner or another. Bloodstained Mire, and then nothing. So I will say, this is kind of part of the reason why we're running the list that we're running. If we look at the deck over here, in these matchups, they're super grindy, and so we want to have more threats. This is why we're running a couple Grim Flayers. We want to have removal that can kill all of our opponent's threats, which is why we're running, fatal, at least 7 pieces of legit removal here. And then, and Terminate can even get a Street Wraith, right? So most of the removal can't get Street Wraith, but at least Terminate can. And then the other big piece is, this is why we're running 4 Liliana of the Veil. So Liliana of the Veil is absolutely a house in the mirrors. And this was what I was finding with the Abzan Shadow builds. And this is why I wanted to try it with this Jun. It was actually the first league I've been running with this new build. But I basically kind of mimicked the Abzan build to some extent to run these 4 Lily, because there's matchups like this where I just want to be able to outgrind our opponent. If we're going to have a grindy matchup, Resolve Liliana just basically locks the opponent out of the game in these mirrors a lot of times, because you just either take away their card or make them sacrifice their creature, and they're not running so many creatures out that that's necessarily something that we can handle. So we're feeling like, instead of needing to have a what do you call it, the Fulminator Mages and the Cyborg plan, we're just hoping that this, we've got a lot more removal and more threats, and ideally this is going to allow us to just outvalue the opponent. And we'll see. We don't know how our opponent's build is, so they may be on the same boat as us, and maybe we're just not as strong as we think. But that's why I'm playing the version I am. So we're just trying not to give our opponent too much information here. We just play out of Wooded Foothills. I think a Bloodstained Mire or a Verdant Catacombs makes it more obvious what we're playing, whereas Wooded Foothills could be Titan Shift like we just played. It could be, Elves or some sort of Kiki Chord type deck. So I guess most ideal would be if our opponent played out like a Tarmogoyf, we can just removal, perfect. So we should be able to just crack this Foothills, go get an Overgrown Tomb, and push that Tarmogoyf. Okay, now Bauble's a great draw. That puts us into position where we could actually Thoughtseize, Bauble, fetch, traverse into our threat. So we're looking at ourselves, right? Or no, do we look at our opponent? Yeah, looked at our opponent. So our opponent had an Inquisition of Kozilek, and that makes sense. We're gonna do fetch and then Thoughtseize. So we decided not to traverse here, and or not that we're not going to traverse, rather. I don't really know what I'm talking about there. Whoa, okay. So we took the opponent's Liliana, clicked through a little fast, but this was their hand with a Liliana. The Inquisition's not in their hand yet, it's on top of their deck. But Liliana, we don't have any cards to answer right now. Assumption is they're going to use the Street Wraith to try and set up their Death Shadow. We have removal for that. And with the Inquisition there, I don't know that we even necessarily want to play the Traverse. We definitely want to have more threats as the game goes on. They also have 2 removal spells. So we may not actually play Traverse here. We may just hold up the Fatal Push because they're going to probably go for the Death Shadow. I guess it depends on if they Inquisition us first or not. I hope we do the Traverse. Well, sometimes it's interesting to re-watch a matchup afterwards. I think actually going back, I probably wouldn't have traversed here. There's a fair assumption that our opponent is just going to Inquisition us and take our creature. I'd rather have the creature in the deck than have spent the Traverse and have a creature taken away from us. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, and so, okay, I gotcha. So I remember this, actually. What I ended up thinking was exactly what I just said. If we traverse for a creature, we're going to have the Inquisition steal the creature from us, and we don't want that. We just don't want that to happen. And these games are probably going to go pretty long, and so I might as well just get value out of the Traverse by going and getting another land. And that puts us in a much stronger mana position than our opponent is. So that makes sense. And we draw a threat with our bauble. So I think the Inquisition, the opponent's probably going to go after one of our removal spells. He could go after the Tarmogoyf, but he has answers for the Tarmogoyf in hand, so I don't think that's going to happen. Yep, looks like he took our cheapest removal and Fatal Push. Then he Street Wraiths. Hits another land. So we have perfect information on our opponent's hand right now. We draw another land. And at this point, I actually just don't want to run out the Tarmogoyf. I know what our opponent's holding on to. I'd rather draw into like a Liliana if possible. Eventually, we may just have to run a creature out into their removal. But as it is, we don't feel the need to run our creatures out into their removal. And this allows us to hold up Terminate if they go for the Death Shadow. So the opponent plays a Death Shadow. Cracks a fetch. He's going to traverse. Looks like he's going to run out for another Death Shadow. Yep. So we're going to terminate one of these. Just can't afford to let him run around with a couple of those. Fatal Push. How timely. So now I feel like we're at the point where opponent's left with just removal spells. Our hand's getting low enough. We're going to use the Tarmogoyf and the Fatal Push here. You know, if we held onto the Tarmogoyf waiting for a Liliana at this point, we're probably not in the position where we're going to be able to toss a bunch of spells from our hand while maintaining the Tarmogoyf, so I might as well just get them to burn one of their spells on their turn. Plus we're getting close to the point where we can hardcast a Street Wraith, and as far as we know, our opponent's not running any Terminates, and so they may not even be able to kill Street Wraith, and it's unblockable. So we get our opponent to attack. We're holding on to the Fatal Push here. We kind of want him to do more damage to himself. We're kind of hoping to close this into one, like a one attack kill. So by blocking, we're forcing him to to basically crack for an upright shock here, and then at that point we'll just go ahead and fatal push his shadow, and so he'll probably, fatal push us in response, and we're left with an empty board, which is pretty common in this mirror. And we can just crack the Verdant for a sideways. At this point we're not really worried about beating them in life total. In fact, he's already used a couple Death Shadow, a Tarmogoyf Traverse, so he's probably running a little thin. Death Shadow's a good draw here, but again, we know he has an Abrupt Decay. I guess this is fine. Kind of the same logic we had previously with Liliana, where, you know, by the time, if we play out the Shadow and so in this case, it's because we want him to use the Abrupt Decay. If we draw a Liliana, it's going to be kind of like game over. We should have a strong grasp on the game, and Abrupt Decay can actually handle Liliana, so we don't want him to have that in hand. And we keep the Verdant Catacombs in hand versus playing it out, because if he draws a Thoughtseize, you know, it gives him a reason to try and Thoughtseize us, and something he can't steal. Drawing an Abrupt Decay is fantastic. So now we're going to play out that Verdant Catacombs. And we're just going to go ahead and swing in. Our opponent has to kill the Shadow here, otherwise he's dead. We have lethal with the Verdant Catacombs. And then probably just... it looks like we're holding on to the Verdant Catacombs. Really no reason to crack it yet. Opponent's going to traverse for another Shadow. And we don't know what our opponent has in hand at this point. So we're just going to kill this Shadow. He's down to one Shadow left in deck. Thin our deck a little more. Bubble. So now we're just in this BGX top deck war. We got a free redraw, which is nice. We wait till our opponent's turn to do this, and that way he can't... If we had done this on our turn, our opponent gets to look at our... If they draw a Thoughtseize, they get to look at our hand and steal whatever card it was. By waiting until their turn, that allows us to draw twice on our turn, where their Sorcery Speed hand disruption is not relevant. Core Clan Rampager. So Gore Clan's a little tougher. Hopefully we hit a Liliana here. That would be ideal. Hey, Liliana. How about that? So we're actually going to get to use Liliana here to kill a creature. He's running pretty thin on creatures, so even though we're down taking her right off the bat, we're in a pretty strong position still, just because he's probably not going... He, she, they... I apologize. I'm trying to get better at this. Our opponent... the odds of them drawing a creature based on how many have already hit the bin is pretty low. So our opponent's going to Thoughtseize our Inquisition. Doesn't bother us. That puts them down to 3. Second Liliana. So we're actually just going to play out the other Liliana over the top of the first Liliana. And uptick. That puts us in a stronger position to kill whichever creature our opponent plays next. Opponent plays out a Bauble, so they'll get a couple cards on their turn. Excellent. So we're going to traverse. If we were at 6 mana, traversing into a Street Wraith would probably be the right way to go here. As it is, probably just a Death Shadow closes the game. So opponent's going to get it, we'll uptick, but the opponent's going to draw 2 cards on their turn now. Gets a push. And Streets Wraiths. So it's interesting. So our opponent actually Street Wraith there. They could have played it out as a creature, but I suppose that's no value, as Liliana would have just made it die. It does make more sense for them to try and get like an Abrupt Decay, possibly to kill the Liliana. Opponent did hit a Tarmogoyf, but again we have Liliana, just a Great kill spell for a deck only running one creature out at a time. And here we're going to get to downtick and then play out the Street Wraith. And that should actually be game. Yep. So we'll be able to kill the Tarmogoyf and then attack lethal unblockable next turn. And he probably doesn't have many, if any, kill spells for the Street Wraith. So we get game 1. And we're going to head to game 2 here. Real quick, we'll take a look at the sideboard. So I can see we took out an Inquisition and all 4 Thoughtseize. We took out the Temur Battle Rage. And we brought in 6 cards. So looking at our sideboard, we would have brought in the 2 Nihil Spellbomb. Makes our opponent's Delirium less consistent, and it's a redraw, which is great in the matchup. Brought in the Terminate and Abrupt Decay, just again more removal for a long grindy matchup, and then Liliana of the Last Hope. So I'm actually okay in this matchup bringing in 6 Lilianas, 4 Liliana of the Veil plus 2 Liliana of the Last Hope. Both do their own thing. I do think Liliana of the Veil is the stronger card in the matchup, but Liliana of the Last Hope, her ultimate can certainly be relevant, and it also can just keep creatures coming back and back and back, and it taxes their Abrupt Decays. Having all these creatures, Death Shadow, Tarmogoyf, Grimflayer maybe a little less so. They may just be able to handle the Grimflayer with creature combat, although we have a lot more removal. And, but if we can tax them, a Liliana of the Last Hope can certainly win the game, or at the very least eat an early Abrupt Decay so that we can stick a super relevant Liliana of the Veil later. So, this is okay. We're on the draw here. We really would prefer more lands. I think we can just plan on firing off the Traverse turn 1. If our opponent hand disruptions us, they're probably taking the Inquisition, so we don't hand disruption them. I think we keep this with the plan to probably, I don't know. I do keep this, but now that I think about this, we're going to have to actually, we either get, okay, sorry, so what I'm thinking about is the Terminate obviously costs the red mana, which means for us to be able to play Terminate, we're going to have to go get a red-green land, Stomping Ground, Traverse for a swamp, and that's fine. That allows us to cast everything in hand. But the deck is more black mana hungry, so not necessarily the most ideal play. I don't know. Maybe we'll just get lucky and draw land and not have to worry about it. So opponent opens up with an Inquisition. Also, I don't know if I really talked about this. I'm not so worried about our life loss in this matchup. We're not rushing to try and get to a Death Shadow. That's why I cut the 4 Thoughtseize and 1 Inquisition. First of all, in just grindy top deck games, this is more of a standard BG thing, and we've kind of geared the deck slightly more in that direction. You don't want to have a bunch of hand disruption as top decks in a game where both players are going to have no cards in hand, and so that's why we cut a bunch of the hand disruption, and then we're cutting the Thoughtseize specifically because essentially everything our opponent was playing short of a Street Wraith is 3 mana or less. So I'm just not worried about racing to a Death Shadow. I would rather just sit back on my plethora of removal and maybe eventually land a Street Wraith and use that to carry on to victory. So draw another Traverse, so that actually makes me feel a little better, although, yeah, so like I said, we're going to have to get a Stomping Ground. We cycle the Traverse into a swamp but we're still a ways away from being able to, like, we can't traverse for a shot or a fetch land. Opponent Street Wraith. Inquisition again. So our opponent, takes the other traverse, which is fine. Don't know if that's the best play or not from them. Well, I guess if they have another hand disruption spell, that makes sense. And they're going to take the Grim Flare. So now we're in a position where, again, we're not necessarily able to even rush to the Death Shadow. Our opponent, knows that our Shadow is not getting under the 13 life threshold anytime soon. Oh, look at that, Bloodstained Mire. Perfect. So we're actually just fine here. Just don't want to give any unnecessary information to our opponent by playing the Bloodstained Mire. There's no need to there. They play out a Nihil Spellbomb. And we draw a Nihil Spellbomb of our own, Nihil Spellbomb. So we're going to play that out. We're going to keep that black mana up. And I think we may actually just... Do we fire this off here? No, I guess there's not really any threat. We can kind of wait to see. They're not running Delve creatures most likely, so there's no reason to proactively go at the graveyard here. Opponent baubles and plays a Tarmogoyf. So we have the choice to either terminate this Tarmogoyf or Nihil Spellbomb. I don't think we really want a Nihil Spellbomb here, so I think we're probably just going to go crack this Bloodstained Mire for a Blood Crypt and then terminate the Tarmogoyf. Another land. And in this case, we're going to go get an Overgrown Tomb. So now we're going to try and rush that Shadow out. That allows us to hold up Terminate and the Nihil Spellbomb. And we're not really super concerned about our opponent's Nihil Spellbomb yet. Opponent has a Fatal Push, not surprising. Loads of removal on both sides here. Forest. So now we're in position where Street Wraith could be really strong. Opponent throws out a Tarmogoyf, and we have the answer for that right here. So at this point, we just decide we need to draw into some action. Our opponent's got more has more cards in hand, so we're going to blow up their graveyard. This may be unnecessary, but I just felt like if they have another threat in hand, we're a little weak. Plus they have Bauble, which could go get them another card. So they're looking a lot stronger in terms of cards in hand. Really looking to go get like a Liliana or... Tarmogoyf's okay. Probably would have rather had like a Street Wraith or a Liliana there. But Tarmogoyf will do. We play the Foothills. That may be a little bit of a mistake. It's possible that holding the Foothills there makes our opponent a little more cautious. So they're going to Bauble. They get a Tarmogoyf. Death Shadow. So I don't know what my opponent has in hand, but I kind of get the feeling like maybe if I attack with the Tarmogoyf here, the opponent will crack the Nihil Spellbomb, making both creatures smaller. Oh no, so actually, I know what's going on here. So actually attack with the Tarmogoyf here, thinking our opponent just isn't going to block. In worst case, if they block and they crack the Nihil Spellbomb, both Tarmogoyfs have 5 damage on each other, and and they just both die. And I'm okay with that trade, especially with the Death Shadow in hand. So we do attack. Now, I know the opponent's going to block, so I guess I just felt safe doing it because of having the Death Shadow. I'm not quite sure. I feel like this is a misplay. I wonder if this cost me the game. Run out the Death Shadow. We can crack the fetch to get our Shadow up to 5. They don't fire off the Nihil Spellbomb. Again, I just think there's no reason to probably attack with the Tarmogoyf if they're looking back. Opponent plays a Shadow. And they do not attack. Probably just being safe, because if they attack and we don't block, we suddenly have a really big Death Shadow, and one removal spell wins the game for us. Another Nihil Spellbomb. This is pretty good. Our opponent's graveyard's a bit weaker right now, but it is a redraw for us. And looks like I fire it off here. Get a Grim Flare. Excellent, we'll run out the Grim Flare. So I think we're looking pretty strong here, actually. Our opponent still has 2 cards in hand, and they do have the Nihil Spellbomb, which is another redraw. So Abrupt Decay is the Death Shadow. That's a little troublesome. So now our blocks are not quite as nice. We can double block the Death Shadow. However, if we don't, well, like this, if we double block the Death Shadow, we're going to get absolutely blown out by a Temur Battle Rage. However, we're going to lose to Temur Battle Rage anyway, so I don't think there's any reason to actually block here at all. And then if we can draw a removal spell, we have lethal on the crackback. So I think we just roll the dice, count on the opponent not having Temur Battle Rage. I took mine out because the matchup's so grindy and the opponents have so much removal that it just seems risky trying to win with a Battle Rage attack. And so the opponent didn't have Battle Rage. Traverse. So, yeah. The other thing we have going on here is if we go for a lethal attack, if we even drew a creature, if they have removal, well, we're not going to go for a lethal attack here either way. We didn't get removal. Just thinking through my previous comment about drawing removal, they are holding up 2 mana. They very well could have removal, and then that would just cost us the game. But either way, we're going to fire off this Traverse. The opponent has a Spell Bomb. Seems like a great time for them to crack their Spell Bomb, make that Traverse do nothing. But I don't know if we hold on to that otherwise. Maybe it would have been better just to hold on to it. Especially considering we're in a tough spot. No, I don't think we have time. I don't know. I think we're kind of in a darned if you do, darned if you don't. We really just need a removal spell. Alright, so the opponent draws a Death Shadow or removal spell, and now the attack is going to be for lethal, and double lethal now that they have the Abrupt Decay. So we're actually going to lose there. Go down to 1-1. And we will move on to the 3rd game where we will be on the play. Sorry, I try really hard not to spoil anything. I did make a comment there. I wonder if this is why I lose the game, so I apologize. I'll try and be better about that on these playbacks. Sideboard, I think I may have tweaked the sideboard a little bit. No, it looks like I kept it the same. I thought maybe I pulled one more piece of hand disruption out, being on the play. So we are on the play here. So this is a little bit of a slow hand, but as I've mentioned, Liliana of the Veil is an absolute house here in this matchup. So I'm just going to keep this. Especially on the play, we have a fair shot at getting to Liliana. The opponent had some hand disruption still, so they may be keeping the full suite in. That just means we have more bombs that affect the battlefield than they do, and I'm okay with that. Thoughtseize, one of those lilies is going to get grabbed for sure. And then they bauble. Now we do have a Death Shadow. So we are going to go for the life loss a little bit here. I don't want to overdo it though. Thoughtseize. There goes Liliana number 2. So suddenly this hand's looking pretty rough. Opponent plays Pithing Needle, so we need to crack the Bloodstained Mire. Otherwise, that Pithing Needle on the Bloodstained Mire would be pretty painful. So we'll go get an Overgrown Tomb. But despite having the Death Shadow, the game's going to be grindy. I'm almost guaranteed that first Death Shadow is going to die anyway, so there's almost no reason to just kind of rush into it at that point. Probably shouldn't even have cracked the first fetch sideways, or probably should have even brought the first shotgun sideways. So we're just going to play an Overgrown Tomb sideways, play out the Nihil Spellbomb, and kind of wait and see. Our opponent has 3 card types in their graveyard. Traverse. So if the opponent had 4 card types in their graveyard, we would definitely crack the Nihil Spellbomb here, but as it is, this just gets them a basic, so we're okay with that. Draw on all the lands. Opponent is getting nice and low. Or Clan Rampager. So we could use a relevant spell, but we're okay letting the Gore Clan swing in once, maybe twice right now. The opponent's down to 2 cards. I don't know that we're in any huge rush. Bauble's great here because it tells us whether or not we should play the... Well, I guess we don't want to play the Foothills either way, right? We already have the Forest. We can't... We only have 1 shock left, and we're not going to go get the Swamp, so... So what did we do there? We just baubled. We saw a Terminate. So we use the Nihil Spellbomb here to draw that Terminate. And we get rid of the Gore Clan Rampager. And then we play out the Wooded Foothills, and I think that's a mistake there. I see that now. We only have 1 land we can get with the Wooded Foothills. Should have played the Forest. And then we draw off our Bauble, trigger. Opponent draws off theirs. We are sitting fine though. We have a Fatal Push and a Death Shadow. Opponent runs out of Grim Flayer, so we're probably just going to strike that thing here. Guess it does make sense to wait and see. We don't have any real threats of our own yet. And I guess we only could have gotten Stomping Ground, so that makes sense why we didn't go for the Fatal Push then. We still can't cast the Death Shadow, which again I'm okay with. Again, we don't necessarily have to race to it in this matchup. I think we probably... No, I was going to say we could let the Grimflayer hit just to get us low enough to cast the Shadow, but we could also just do that off a Stomping Ground. Definitely want to just kill it here. We don't want to let them filter their draws. That's too powerful. Opponent's down to 5. Liliana Last Hope, we have an Abrupt Decay, which is great. Opponent down ticks, they're gonna grab a Death Shadow there. Yeah. So we've already seen all of these here. Pretty sure they're gonna cast the Death Shadow right now. So there was no reason to destroy the Shadow there, and it actually is going to work out really well for us, as we're going to be able to Fatal Push their Death Shadow, and we don't, and that allowed us to save the Abrupt Decay for Liliana. Now the opponent can't use Liliana to return the Death Shadow again. Pretty huge. Opponent doesn't do anything, so now we could actually crack the Wooded Foothills to get a Death Shadow out. It'll only be a 1/1. We could also just throw out the Grimflayer and just try and carry on that. Be interesting, yeah. Fatal Push is good for us here. The opponent's got more cards in hand, but we're just, you know, for all we know, our opponent is sitting on a bunch of hand disruption. You know, they seem to have kept most of their hand disruption in. Street Wraith is absolutely massive here, and this is why I kind of keep saying, like, I don't feel the urge to play out the Death Shadow necessarily. Street Wraith is unblockable, and unless our opponent is playing Terminates, it's pretty much unkillable. And so this is going to give us, especially with a Fatal Push in hand, potentially going to give us a real quick way to end this game. So opponent really needs to like race us now. They have a Traverse. Get a Death Shadow. We're sitting on a Fatal Push, so we feel great. And if they had hand disruption, they would have used it. So I'm not really sure. They must be just sitting on more hand or more removal at this point. We get a Bauble. We don't even have to kill the Death Shadow yet. You can just wait till their turn. Maybe get them to play out a... I guess it doesn't matter. Even if they drew a Liliana, they're just going to get another Death Shadow off of it. Should wait to crack the Bauble on their turn. There we go. Opponent's going to go for the swing. No? They just concede, so they could have Bloodstained Mire. They didn't know what we had in hand. So they could have Bloodstained Mire and gotten their Shadow to 12, but they must just not have had anything else relevant enough to finish the game or close the game. We did have them either way, but they just conceded at that point as having no way to kill us before we would kill them. So anyway, that puts us to 2-2 in the match, and that'll put us 2-0 in the league, and we'll be back with the next match shortly.